In 1838, a 17-year-old slave named Stephen Bishop was brought to the entrance of Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, and handed an oil lantern. His owner, a lawyer from Glasgow named Franklin Gorin, had just purchased the cave for $5,000 and wanted to turn it into a tourist attraction. Bishop was told to learn the passages and guide wealthy visitors through them. The cave had been known since 1798, when a hunter named John Houchins chased a wounded bear into the entrance. For 40 years, white guides showed tourists the Rotunda, the haunted chambers, Steamboat Rock, all within the so-called Old Cave. Beyond the Old Cave, nobody went, because beyond it was the Bottomless Pit, 105 feet of pure darkness. When guides threw burning torches into it, the flames died before they reached the bottom. No one in 4 decades had crossed it. Bishop, according to a visitor who described him years later, was part mulatto and part Indian, with the look of a Spaniard, black curling hair, a long moustache, broad chest, and slightly bowed legs. He taught himself to read. Professors of geology who descended, and in the side passages 20 miles from the entrance, in absolute darkness where no light had reached in millennia, mummies, human bodies wrapped in woven reed mats, wearing moccasins, buried with stone tools. Someone had carried them 20 miles into total darkness and laid them down 4,000 years ago. This is an investigation into what Stephen Bishop found beyond the bottomless pit. Who brought the dead 20 miles into a cave that has no light? What happened to the bodies after they were removed? And why 600 miles of passages beneath Kentucky remain unexplored? Mammoth Cave is the longest known cave system on Earth, over 420 miles mapped, an estimated 600 miles unexplored. Formed over 300 million years ago when groundwater dissolved limestone beneath a protective sandstone cap. The entrance is massive, wide enough to drive a truck through. Inside, the temperature holds at 54 degrees year-round. The air is still, the humidity constant. These conditions make the cave a natural preservative. Woven moccasins left 4,000 years ago still look wearable. Reed torches still have char marks, and bodies left in the dry upper passages mummify instead of decomposing. Before Stephen Bishop, the known cave was roughly 10 miles of passages, all within the old cave near the entrance. Everything beyond the bottomless pit was unknown. Not unmapped, unknown. The person who opened the largest cave system on Earth was not a geologist or an explorer. He was a teenage slave with a lantern and a ladder who crossed a pit that grown men refused to approach. The bottomless pit is not actually bottomless. It is 105 feet deep, a vertical shaft in the cave floor that drops into a lower passage. But in 1838, with nothing but oil lanterns and burning torches, the pit might as well have been infinite. Light disappeared into it. Sound took too long to return. The guides who had worked the cave for decades treated it as the boundary of the known world, the edge of the map, the point beyond which you did not go. According to Gorin, who wrote about it after Bishop's death, Bishop was the first person who ever crossed the bottomless pit. The method was crude. Bishop found a natural ledge along one wall of the pit that narrowed to nothing in the middle. He placed a ladder across the gap, a wooden ladder that flexed under his weight over 100 feet of empty air, and he walked across it. On the other side, the cave opened up, not gradually, dramatically. The passages beyond the pit were wider, taller, and more extensive than anything in the old cave. Bishop spent hours exploring by the light of his single lantern, pushing deeper into passages that no human being had entered in recorded history. He found the River Styx first, a body of dark water flowing silently through a limestone channel. He crossed it. Beyond it he found another river, which he called the Dead Sea, a wide underground lake. In its waters he caught eyeless fish, translucent white creatures that had evolved in total darkness for so long that they had lost the biological capacity for sight. He brought specimens to the surface. Scientists who examined them were astonished, but formal taxonomic description of the species did not occur until decades later. Bishop found Mammoth Dome, a vertical chamber rising 192 feet, taller than a 15-story building. He found Cleveland Avenue, a passage stretching over 2 miles in a straight line. He found Bottomless Pit Avenue, Gothic Avenue, River Hall, Silliman's Avenue, each name his own. The map he drew by hand in 1842, working entirely from memory and lantern light, remained the most accurate map of Mammoth Cave for the next 40 years. A slave who could not legally own property had produced the definitive cartographic document for the largest cave system on the planet. And deep in the side passages, miles from the entrance, he found the dead. The mummies of Mammoth Cave are among the most significant and least studied archaeological finds in American history. The first was discovered between 1811 and 1813, before Bishop's time, by saltpeter miners working in Short Cave near the main Mammoth system. They found a crypt roofed with a large flat stone, and inside it a woman seated upright, wrapped in 2 decorated deerskins and shrouded in a woven textile. She was nearly 6 feet tall. Her teeth and nails were in perfect condition. She wore pigment on her lips. Her hair was cut short. Around her neck hung a necklace strung with the hooves of young deer, which gave her the name she has carried ever since, Fawnhoof. Fawnhoof was not an ordinary burial. The preservation technique, according to researchers who examined the body, bore similarities to methods used in ancient Egyptian mummification. The woven textile that shrouded her was not rough. It was sophisticated, tightly constructed, and consistent with advanced fiber technology. She had been buried with tools, ornaments, and ceremonial objects in a stone crypt 10 feet below the cave floor. She was someone of status. After Fawnhoof, more bodies emerged. Little Alice, found over 9,000 feet inside the cave system, a child of about 9 years, buried with artifacts that showed the craft of what one researcher called an intelligent and civilized race. Scudder's mummy, a dark-skinned person with red hair, wrapped in deerskin and buried under 9 feet of earth inside a passage. Lost John, found in 1935, a man who had been crushed by a 6-ton boulder while mining gypsum roughly 2,000 years ago. His body was so well preserved that the expression on his face was still visible. The cave's constant temperature and humidity had kept him exactly as the rock had left him. These bodies raise a question that no one has satisfactorily answered. The mummies were not found near the entrance. They were found miles deep inside a cave system that requires navigating total darkness, crossing underground rivers, and passing through passages so narrow that a person must crawl. Whoever carried these bodies into the cave did so deliberately, over enormous distances, in conditions that would challenge a modern caving team with electric lights and GPS. They did it with reed torches that burned for minutes at a time before needing to be replaced. And they did it 4,000 years ago. What happened to the mummies after their discovery is a story of commerce, spectacle, and institutional negligence that spans 2 centuries. Fawnhoof was purchased in 1816 by Nahum Ward of Ohio, who also bought several other mummies and artifacts from the cave. Ward donated the mummy to the American Antiquarian Society, where it remained for 59 years. In 1876, Fawnhoof was exhibited at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. the World's Fair celebrating America's 100th birthday. Tens of thousands of people walked past her body. In 1893, she was displayed again at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Then she was transferred to the Smithsonian Institution. The Smithsonian examined her, they photographed her, they displayed her until 1900, and then, sometime after 1900, they dissected her. They took apart a 4,000-year-old mummy that had survived intact in a Kentucky cave for millennia, cut it into pieces, and stored the bones in a box under accession number 4789. Researcher Angelo George, who spent years tracking the fawn hoof remains, stated that the bones were still at the Smithsonian in the box. But the intact body, the preserved skin, the woven textile, the deerskin wrappings, the pigment on her lips, the necklace of deer hooves, all gone, destroyed in examination. The other mummies fared no better. Little Alice was stolen from Salt's Cave by 3 local men, who sold the body to a competing cave owner named Larkin Proctor for $85. Proctor planted the mummy in his own cave and announced its discovery to attract tourists. The body was eventually returned, but had been damaged in transport. Scudder's mummy was displayed in various exhibitions before disappearing entirely. No museum claims to hold it. No record documents its final location. The pattern is identical to what happened with the Spirit Cave mummy, the Catalina Island skeletons, and every other anomalous find that challenges the accepted narrative. The remains are discovered. They generate public interest. Institutions take possession. The bodies are studied behind closed doors, and then they vanish, either physically destroyed, lost in storage, or returned to the earth under NAGPRA, where no scientist can examine them again. Stephen Bishop did not simply explore Mammoth Cave, he became its mind. Every visitor who entered the cave between 1838 and his death in 1857 was guided by Bishop or by guides he had trained. He named the formations, the rivers, the passages, he told the stories, he developed the routes. Visitors described him as brilliant, witty, and deeply knowledgeable. Alexander Clark Bullitt, who published the first guidebook to the cave in 1845, credited Bishop with every major discovery beyond the Bottomless Pit. A visitor wrote that Bishop had a fine genius, knowledge of Latin and Greek, much knowledge of geology, and that professors spoke highly of his expertise. He learned whatever he wished to learn without trouble. He was, by every account, one of the most remarkable men in Kentucky. And he was property. When Gorin sold the cave to Dr. John Croghan of Louisville in 1839, Bishop was included in the sale. He was sold with the cave, as if he were a formation inside it. Croghan used Bishop to run the tourist operation, while he pursued a disastrous medical experiment. In 1842, Croghan moved 16 tuberculosis patients into the cave, believing the constant temperature would cure them. He built stone and wooden huts inside the passages. The patients worsened. Several died underground. The experiment was abandoned after 5 months. Croghan himself died of tuberculosis in 1849. His will stipulated that his slaves would be freed, but the estate was tied up in legal disputes for years. Bishop was not freed until 1856. He died in 1857, 1 year after gaining his freedom, at the age of 36. He was buried in the old guides' cemetery near the cave entrance. His headstone reads simply, Stephen Bishop, first guide and explorer of the Mammoth Cave. No mention of his map. No mention of the river Styx, the eyeless fish, the mummies, the miles of passages he opened. No mention that everything the world knows about the longest cave on earth began with a 17-year-old slave and a wooden ladder across a bottomless pit. 420 miles mapped, 600 miles not. New passages are discovered every year by volunteer teams from the Cave Research Foundation. The work is slow, physical and unfunded. In 1972, Mammoth was connected to the adjacent Flint Ridge system, creating a single cave of unprecedented scale. Further connections have been found since. The system may eventually prove to be over 1,000 miles long, and the archaeological record within it has barely been touched. The deeper passages have never been systematically surveyed for archaeological material. Reed torches and moccasins have been found 20 miles from the entrance, but no comprehensive study has been conducted. No funding. No institutional priority. The National Park Service manages the cave for conservation and public access, not excavation. 600 miles of unexplored cave, 4,000 years of human presence. And the total archaeological effort amounts to whatever 19th century tourists happen to stumble across. The central mystery of Mammoth Cave is not the mummies themselves, it is the distance. Fawnhoof was found in Short Cave, relatively close to the surface, but Little Alice was found over 9,000 feet inside the system. Other artifacts, torches, moccasins, petroglyphs, have been documented 20 miles from any entrance. 20 miles of absolute darkness. No ambient light, no natural waypoints, no markers except whatever the travellers themselves created. Modern cavers with electric headlamps, backup lights and detailed maps consider a 20-mile penetration extreme, requiring days of preparation and a full support team. Ancient people did it with reed torches that burned for roughly 30 minutes each. A round trip would require hundreds of torches, carried by hand, along with human bodies, stone tools and woven textiles. The logistics imply organisation, planning and purpose that does not match primitive hunter-gatherers on a whim. These were deliberate expeditions into the deepest darkness on the continent, carrying the dead to a specific destination for a specific reason, and the reason has never been identified. The cave was not a convenient burial ground. It was the opposite of convenient. Whatever purpose drove people to carry their dead 20 miles underground, past rivers and through crawlways 4,000 years ago, it was important enough to justify an effort that most modern humans would not attempt. And whatever they knew about the cave, about its full extent, about what lay in its deepest passages, they knew it without maps, without lights, and without any technology that the archaeological record can explain. Stephen Bishop crossed the Bottomless Pit in 1838 with a ladder and a lantern. He opened the largest cave system on Earth. He discovered rivers, species, and passages that science would spend the next century documenting. He drew a map from memory that was not surpassed for 40 years. He was sold with the cave, freed 1 year before he died, and buried in a cemetery that most visitors walk past without stopping. The mummies he found were taken from the cave, exhibited at world's fairs, dissected by the Smithsonian, stolen by competing cave owners, lost in storage, and scattered across institutions that cannot account for them. Fawnhoof, nearly 6 feet tall, with pigment on her lips and a necklace of deer hooves, exists as bones in a box under an accession number. Little Alice was kidnapped from one cave and planted in another for $85. The rest are gone. 600 miles of cave beneath Kentucky have never been explored. 4,000 years of human presence in those passages have never been systematically studied. The deepest archaeological evidence sits 20 miles from any entrance, carried there by people who navigated absolute darkness with reed torches and left no explanation for why. The longest cave on Earth was opened by a slave who could not own the map he drew of it. The bodies he found were taken by institutions that destroyed them, and the darkness he walked into, alone at 17, with one lantern and no rope, stretches 600 miles in every direction and still has not been fully lit. Subscribe if you want more. The next investigation sits beneath the most expensive real estate on Earth, and the geologist who mapped what was under it never published what he found.